Let's move on to plan for the unplannable. Now welcome up Mr. Hans van Grieken. He is Vice President of Business Innovation at Capgemini. Give him a warm hand when he enters the stage.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you ever wondered how a company like Samsung is able to deliver to the market within 4 months a better product than the competitor presented in the case of iPad 2. It's not only because they have other means of innovation, methodologies like TRIZ, but moreover, it's because of the fact that they have completely redesigned their supply chain. And the guy who did it is actually this guy. What they created is a control tower, which basically is geared at agility. Instead of trying to predict the future, which is to most of us impossible, their philosophy has been to be as adaptive as possible to things that are by nature difficult to predict. Now, obviously, to monitor global trends in terms of numbers is important. If you look at the sheer massive numbers in the country that I live in, which is across the channel, is an indication of the density.
Here we can see the GPS traces of 24 hours worth of shipping as it passes through the channel. Streams of southbound vessels pass up the English side, northbound ships hug the French. And in between, countless ferries dodge across the straits into Dover.
This is just one day. As a company, for a number of years, we have produced a world report on trade volumes. We recently had to skip one, so we will be presenting the next version in 6 weeks. But if you look at the trends over the past years, then the indications that we have from our perspective is that there is a slight decay. If you look at the trade index, the way we have put it together, what you see is that there's a constant battle between the big economies on the one side of this slide, and as you see, some of the European companies are battling out their part of supply chain volumes in this graph. There's 3 trends from a personal perspective that I would like to focus on. Although they're difficult to capture in the research that we have, I think they're important for discussion, and this afternoon in a breakout session at 3 o'clock, I invite you to be part of that discussion. I'm also an academic, and one of the reports that we recently delivered from Nyenrode MBA University is on the automotive market in China, in particular the supplier side of that market. What we found there is that increasingly tier 2 or 3 supplier companies are moving up the value chain and entering into the market of, let's say, the top guys. The second trend that we see, and I'm just using a medical device here to illustrate that, is a tremendous growth of companies that used to produce products towards putting on top of the product services and ending up with selling services, as you also mentioned in your presentation. We see a tremendous degree of companies trying to make that shift for numerous reasons. In this case, you're looking at a company that built on top of their medical device 115 additional services, and at the end of the day, they're not selling a product anymore, but they're selling a life cycle of functions. And the third one, very actual, it was in the April publication of the Harvard Business Review, is what is known as reverse innovation. The case that was described there is the case in which a company called Harman International, which I'm sure you'll know from the audio system in your car, has reversed their innovation process in the sense that our old paradigm in which we in the West come up with bright ideas and we have them produced in China was turned around. So products that were designed for India and China were tuned up to bring to Europe. It's a reverse innovation process, which is the nature of what I do at the university, and it's an interesting trend. It's the globalization of R&D. Now, if you look back over the past 2-3 years, I'm sure you remember some of these incidents. And if you put them into a certain perspective, which I'll do in a moment, then this is a way you could look at it. Over the years, you've seen an increase of major incidents. And these major incidents, I'm blackening the slide a bit because they're all very sad things, have had huge impact on your industry. In fact, I think it's fair to say that business as unusual has become usual. Although I'm a big supporter of data-driven research, and that is will be part of our discussion, I think at the end of the day in your industry, your ability to plan for the unplannable is an important part of what makes you successful. Some things can't be planned, you can only prepare for them. Some things might be plannable in the sense that you might be seeing them. So this afternoon, I'll be dealing with this question. Before, during, after an event and lessons learned, man-made versus act of God, and how do you respond? And I think there's interesting cases there. Let me take just an example from my youth. My father used to be the procurement director for the Dutch National Railroad Company. And the company had to go into IT, so Wang was hired to bring computers into that organization. We're talking about 25, 30 years ago. And I remember that I was watching television, and my father was watching television too, and this guy is famous in my country. And when he said, well, there may be some low frost, so frost which is just below zero, in the northern part of the country, then my father would instantly walk to the phone, get in touch with his supplier and say, well, deliver me 20 in the north, 30 in the middle, etc. So the sheer word frost in the north triggered a response. And obviously, the guys that automated the process never asked him, what are your triggers? In other words, it illustrates that out there might be signals that you don't see that might help you deal with the unexpected. And one way of doing this is to have a very tight international network with suppliers. The company I represent already for 12 years produces the 3PL logistics provider overview. And we try to give an insight in some of the characteristics of what makes relationships successful between shippers and their 3PLs. And this is an overview which this afternoon we'll dive into a bit more. But what is particularly interesting in this one, I mean, this is pretty straightforward, right? You hire a 3PL for international transport, domestic, warehousing, etc. But would you also hire a 3PL for his or her capability to deliver really good information when you need it? And there you see the market is very slow and very small. And the assumption, therefore, in my case is that the ability to share information across a supply chain, particularly when things get rough, is of paramount importance. As you see, because if you look over the past years, the number of shippers as well as 3PL coming from that other world, that new world, and entering your world is growing by the numbers. And so if I look at this part of, let's say, solving a problem that might occur when it needs to be, the tsunami in terms of supplier accidents, then you see that this one is perceived to be, in our research, the most important one. Once the incident occurs, whether it's an incident triggered by a long-term development or an incident triggered by an act of God, the ability to share information across chains with partners, with 3PL suppliers, has become crucial. In fact, for a number of years now, when we've done this research amongst 1,560 suppliers and 3PLs across the world, this is perceived to be one of the major important challenges of the industry. So this afternoon, I hope to have a discussion with you on how best-in-class examples deal with unpredictability and plan to deal with that unpredictability. Because at the end of the day, your industry is driven by incidents and forces that to a large degree you cannot control, but you have to manage.
Dans un camion de livraison, et puis j'atterris ici. Oh, c'est incroyable. Hein? T'entends ça, chérie?
Ben oui, c'est fou.
Thank you for your time.
Talking about managing the problems, that guy was a master. He came to the end. Now, you're talking here about you can't plan for the future, you have to be receptive to change. Would you say the logistics sector, the transport companies, are, well, where are they on a scale in the adaptiveness to change?
I would say relatively low.
Relatively low.
Yes. I don't know if we can ask a question, but the question I would like to ask is what percentage of your load is actually filled? So are you full load most of the time, or is it 60% or 70%?
We can do hands up. Full load most of the time. Hands up. Nobody. So half full. 1, 2, maybe 3 hands, yeah? And what is the third alternative? Maybe 10%?
Well, you know, it's a burden to the environment, it's
Yeah.
a burden to our traffic density, but much more important, it's a burden to the customer. The example I would like to give on the positive side is, for instance, the Global Consumer Goods Forum is a worldwide organization that embodies both the big retailers, the Walmarts, Carrefour, Metro Group in Germany, as well as their suppliers, Heineken, Coca-Cola, Kraft, etc. The company I work for brings them together across the world in 6 sessions, their supply chain directors, and asks them, what would the future look like, and what would be the things that you have in common? And they just recently produced their 2020 outlook. And one of the conclusions they drew, and I think that's a very important one, is that in times of uncertainty and in times of tremendous burdens on the economy as well as on the environment, we need to start sharing supply chain capacity, although we are competitors. And because of that, we will put in place IT solutions, cloud solutions that enable us not to become partners, although we are competitors, for the sheer fact of we will better serve our customer, less pollute the environment, and be more effective.
So this is a big challenge also in this room. We could see that. I was reading the paper today, and here they say they have done research on how receptive to change executives are. And this article says that executives from the Nordic countries, the northern countries, they have harder to adapt to change. Do you agree?
Well, in that case, for those of you that would be interested, please read the Harvard Business Review article about Harman Kardon. It's really interesting to read how these Northern European executives, in the end, try to kill the innovation that was created in China and India. And in my job, I see that happen a lot. It has to do with control, it has to do with tradition, and it has to do with risk averseness.
So in this article, they say the most worrying thing is not exactly that they are not receptive to change, but they're not as hungry as other nationalities to work towards their customers and to change.
Well, as the example, that's why I love the article. So the guys that used to be, or still are, the top suppliers for automotive, in-car, stereo, etc. 70% of the market, really good. No debate about that. Their customers being BMW, Mercedes, etc. So next to them was put a team of Indians and Chinese, and they got the assignment, we want the same, but we want it for 1/3 of the price. And that's a question that in my country or in Germany you would never ask to an R&D team. It's just, it can't be done. And at the end of the day, they did it. So the world is changing rapidly, and as a result, this world is changing rapidly.
So we have a question for you, one of these keypad questions concerning change. Let's see. Considering the difficulties we have in predicting the future, how good are you and your company in being responsive to change? Very bad, not so good, medium, and very good. Please give your vote now. So we'll see here, Hans, if they perceive themselves as good changers. Well, not so good 40% and medium 40%. Do you think they're being honest?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yes. I think it's not a question of not